Jonathan has asked me to, I keep forgetting, to put titles of the lessons up here. So today's lesson is Festus, Agrippa, and a shipwreck. Okay? So that will tell, he wants it on the thing so that when someone looks on the web, on the YouTube, they can have any idea where they're at in the story. So that's what that is. So we are there. So Paul has been sitting in a prison in Caesarea for 2 years while Felix, there's this Felix Festus thing going on. And in my head, the procurator was Felix and the new one is Festus, and it is so easy to mix names like this and to figure out who's who. So here's my little game on how I remember who's who and who's where. Felix has 5 letters. Festus has 6 letters. 5 comes before 6. And I play stupid games like this all the time. How do you remember verse numbers? How do you remember this and that? So I play these dumb games, and that's kind of how I. So anyway, Felix is first, and then Festus. And Felix is at the end of his term. He is having in Caesarea at that time. Caesarea, by the way, is the town on the coast right here. It is the main port for Jerusalem. So when ships come in and out, they go to Caesarea. It is also the home of the governor, is Caesarea. He lives there. He's called a procurator, but he lives in Caesarea. He also has a palace in Jerusalem because he has to go to Jerusalem, and God forbid that he not live in a palace wherever he's at, you know. So as a matter of fact, if you go back to King Herod the Great, he had palaces all over the place. He had a palace in Jericho, he had a palace in Jerusalem, he had a palace in Caesarea, he had a palace on Masada, he had palaces all over the place. So anyway, that's totally off information. Anyway, so Paul is in Caesarea and he is in prison, and Felix, there's conflict in Caesarea between Jews and Gentiles. So much so that it's out of control. Again, like the story of that area in this time, it is completely out of control again. And Nero gets word of it, and so Felix is out of there. So he gets taken out. He leaves Paul as that change leaves Paul as an unsolved case that needs to be dealt with. And Felix comes in, okay? Festus comes in, 5 comes before 6. Festus comes in. Festus, I looked it up, and according to AI, Felix, because he has a brother that is good friends of Nero, or Nero's a treasury department, he gets Felix not having the bad punishment from being when you get removed, I think I told some of you guys this last week, when you get removed from a rulership position in the Roman world, you get put on an island, and you are left there and just to die. So you are punished. So you have to do a job well, or you get, sent away, and you are punished. And usually they starve to death. So that's how they deal with their own people who don't do the job. So Felix gets out of this because his brother talks Nero out of it. He seems to get all kinds of things happen because people are helping him on stuff. But he's out of there. And Festus comes in. Now, according to, and that's just according to AI, whether or not that's true or not, good old Good old AI. As I asked them what happened to Felix after he got out of there. And Festus, there's not a whole lot. There's only 2 people who mention Festus in history. One is Luke, and the other is Josephus. So those are the only 2 times Festus is mentioned, at least that they have found so far. Okay? And lots of times when people say, well, there's no evidence that this happened other than the Bible, and so it can't be true. And I go, well, then they just haven't found it yet. Because they used to say, go back 150 years, that the whole story of Jericho didn't happen until they found Jericho. And then they found that, they go, well, Jericho couldn't have been destroyed all those times. Until they kept digging in Jericho. And at Jericho, right now, you can go down 7 layers and see a city that was destroyed, and the city under it that was destroyed, and the city under it that was destroyed, and so they, well, maybe that part of the Bible is true, huh? So my thought is, if something doesn't appear to be substantiated outside of the Bible as true, as an evidentiary type thing, they just haven't found it yet. So probably there's information about Festus out there somewhere that they haven't found yet. And there's lots of stuff like that. So anyway, he's there, and there's some background on Festus and Agrippa and what goes on with Agrippa's. So this is in the front of your notes. If you see it in brown, that's background information, historical information outside of the Bible. Okay, just letting you know that. So there's not much about Festus. He is only going to be in office for a couple years, and he's going to die in office in about 62. It's about 60 right now. So it has been 30 years since Jesus went to the cross. Just trying to get a framework going. It's been 30 years. And so, let me see, get my head straight here. So Agrippa the second is Herod the Great's great-grandson. And there has been someone in each generation that has been rulers in the Herodic dynasty. Agrippa the second's father, we're talking about Agrippa the second, because when you read this in the Bible, there are 2 Agrippas. There's an Agrippa the first and Agrippa the second, and they just call him Agrippa. So you got to kind of know that this is Agrippa the second. The reason you know for sure this is Agrippa the second, because it's in Acts 25 and 26, and in Acts 12, Agrippa dies. So that's Agrippa the first, okay? So that's kind of an easy way to tell. Agrippa the first, which is his father. So you got, make this clear, you got Herod the Great. He had lots of sons, 4 main ones, I guess. One of his wives was Mariamne. Do you remember her? She was part of the the Hasmonean dynasty, which makes her, his wife, a little bit Jewish. Okay? So this is how Herod the Great claimed to be king of the Jews, because his wife was Jewish. So he claimed Jewishness based on the marriage. They had 2 kids, and he ends up killing her. He ends up killing his wife, and he ends up killing these 2 kids. But before those 2 kids were killed, they had kids, and one of these kids is Agrippa. All right, and he has a kid. Okay, you see the pattern there? Okay, now because they had to get out of town, because Dad was very jealous over who's going to take over the throne, they go to Rome. And Agrippa the first is raised with Claudius. Like friends, like in the neighborhood, like right there. Claudius was the emperor before Nero. Starting to see the reason I'm telling you this is because the interactions between Claudius and Nero and Agrippa are going to, because of this friendship that happened here. All right? There's another one over here, Antipas, Herod Antipas. He's the guy that took out John the Baptist. Okay? So this is kind of cool because when we get into it, I'm going to show you how God provided the gospel to that generation, to that generation, to that generation, and to that generation, in the line of the Herods. And I just thought that was, I don't know, I don't know that any of them responded, but talk about God's love and concern for leaders who are not necessarily even good people. And he's going to present the gospel to each generation. These are the ones I know of. Most likely he presented the gospel to the other members of the generations too. So that's pretty cool. So that's who Herod Agrippa is. He's good. His father, this is the one we're talking about today. His father and Claudius were good friends. And when he dies, Claudius is going to award Herod Agrippa, his son, some rulership out of tribute to his father. Okay, so he's going to become King Agrippa. Okay, so that's kind of cool. One of the things that he gives him early on, there's details in here that I will probably have to pass over, but one of the things he gives, Claudius gives to Agrippa, is the rights of the high priestly robes. Now we go, what on earth does this have to do with anything? But whoever, the high priest of Israel wore their robes, wore their very special robes, only on the high feast days. And for the procurator of the area to have control over those robes meant he had control over the Sanhedrin. So if any of you watched The Chosen, Season 5, Episode 1, okay, you have? Did you see Caiaphas walk into Pontius Pilate's room, and they had this little, and Pontius Pilate's playing this joke with him about the robes. And he gets the robes out of the cabinet, and I thought, I'm just really thrilled that they were playing this out correctly according to history. He gets the robes out of the cabinet, and he goes, I think I'll touch them. And no, you can't. If he touches them, they're defiled for 7 days, which means they can't be used for Passover. And so in the movie, in the TV show, Pilate is like playing this joke on Caiaphas. Caiaphas does not see it as a joke at all. But he ends up taking a long thing, getting the hanger and handing it to Caiaphas without touching the ropes. That is substantiated in history, that the procurators of the area had control over the robes. And this is just me using up time, but I just get real excited about all this stuff. I really do. And so that was one thing that showed that. Now, when Agrippa, who is, by the way, a tad bit Jewish, okay, because he came through Mariamne, all right, he wants to be a leader that does the Jews, keeps the peace. And to do that, he's got to pacify the Jews, take care of them well as he can, and he's got to follow all of Rome's rule at the same time. This is not an easy job. So, but that's what he's going to do. Festus wants to do the same thing. Festus has just been brought in. He wants to do the same thing, and I'll get into that in a minute. But just to give you one little background story that isn't in the Bible, there was a time when Festus and Agrippa are both ruling, And Agrippa is really, his territory is up here in the Syrian territory. So, and he gets part of northern Galilee on the eastern side. Festus's territory is down here. So it's kind of like when Herod Antipas and Pilate were both ruling different territories of Israel at the same time, and they didn't get along until they had a common enemy, which was Jesus, right? Okay, so that's what's going on. But they both, his main territory is up here. This is Agrippa's main territory up here. This is Festus's main territory over here. And they both have palaces in Jerusalem. So there are times that they're both in Jerusalem. So there's one thing that Agrippa did is he has the old Hasmonean Palace, which is on the other side of the valley that looks into the temple area, and he decided he was going to make a patio out there to have breakfast. And as he sits and has breakfast, he can watch the priests. And he's a little bit higher, and he can see over into the temple and watch the priests do all their sacrifices. Well, the priests get really annoyed at being spied on, which is how they look at it. So, and Festus, he agrees with Agrippa that they should keep an eye on it. And at the same time, so the Jews build a wall. So I'm trying to show you what the tension looks like, because the tension in Jerusalem is going to continue and continue and continue until AD 70. So I'm trying to build up this constant tension that when you get to AD 70, you go, all of a sudden exploded out of nothing, everything was calm and peaceful. I'm going, no, it was not. Okay? So the Jews build a big wall on the side of their temple so that Agrippa can't see in. At the same time, the soldiers from the Antonia fortress who guard the temple during the feast can't see in. And so there's this huge conflict. So most of the time Agrippa's doing great things for the Jews. This time there wasn't. So he orders them tearing it down, and they won't. So they take it to Nero. And Nero's mistress at the time, and his going to become his second wife, I think, if I've got this right, is a God-fearer, and she advocates on the side of the Jews. So Nero follows that and lets them keep their wall. I'm just trying to explain the tensions of the silliness going on. It's not silly. Of the conflicts going on in Jerusalem, and that's just one. There was like a list of 5 or 6 that are documented at this time between Agrippa and Festus and Jerusalem and Jews and whatnot. So that's just an example of life in Jerusalem. So Festus is now the new procurator, and within 3 days, he's got this prisoner down here. He wants to do a good job. Even the historians say he was probably better than Felix. He wants to do a good job. And just the fact that within 3 days of his arrival into Caesarea, he makes a trip up to Jerusalem to deal with the charges against this guy in the prison. Reminds me, it just gives you the impression he wants to do a good job. So he gets up there, and they, of course, the Jews do it all over again. You've got to realize this is 2 years later. This has been a trial that's been on hold for 2 years. And they are still furious. And so they accuse, and we are in chapter 25, right? Yes. All right, so they accuse Paul of all kinds of horrible stuff, none of which is illegal by Roman rules. So, and they even say, they ask Festus, the new procurator. This is their being very insincere and untruthful with him. They say, can you bring him here and we'll have our trial here? And the reason they wanted them to bring him up from Caesarea back to Jerusalem is because they were going to ambush him on the way and kill him. Now that is stated in here. All right? Festus probably doesn't know this. Otherwise, I mean, you would say, well, hey, because we're going to ambush and kill him. Yeah, I just don't think they would say that, you know. And so, but he says no because there's this basic law in Rome that says you keep the person where he's at. You don't transfer trials. All right? So he gets back to Rome, he gets back to Caesarea, and within the next day or two or something, you'll have to read through it and see how many days it is. He calls Paul up in front of him and asks him what's going on, and Paul gives his defense. And so we are on page 2. I think.
We are.
All right, we are on page 2. Okay, so he's presented, but Paul pleads not guilty, and but Festus is now between a rock and a hard place. He really thinks after he sees all the information, there's no reason for Paul to be in jail. I mean, he didn't do anything. The people who started the riot were other people. He was just standing there, you know, and he didn't do anything. So so Festus kind of knows this, but if he lets Paul go, he's just destroyed his ability to control the Jews. If he sentences Paul, he's just broken Roman law. This is really a hard spot. And he's brand new. He's been there like 2 weeks now. You know, and by the way, if you mess up as a procurator in Rome, there's some serious consequences. Okay? So he is walking this road very carefully, and he looks at Paul and he goes, how about we do transfer you back to Rome? Back to Jerusalem. And Paul goes, Paul, I think, knows about, or at least has an idea that there's a plot against him. So this is when he has a choice. Do he either go to Jerusalem and get killed on the way, or does he appeal to Caesar? So on my mind, as I read through this for years and years, I go, why appeal to Caesar if you're innocent and the guy knows you're innocent? Why go through all this? Because he could have been released. And he's taking advantage of a good legal rule. And he's going to, I don't think he did that for his own safety, because earlier it said that he didn't care if he lived or died as long as he got to present the gospel. So I don't think he's like, oh, I'm so worried about my life. You know, I don't think that's it. I think knows that there's a bigger plan, and he's got to get, and besides that, Jesus had just told him up in Jerusalem that he has to go to Rome. So he appeals to Caesar. Okay. The problem is, Festus cannot send Paul to Caesar, who is Nero, without a document defining the accusations against him. And there are no accusations against him that would hold up in a Roman court. So there's nothing. So now he doesn't know what to do. I'm talking about a difficult first 2 weeks as ruling. Okay, so at the same time, Agrippa, who is the other ruler in the area, decides he's going to come down and welcome Festus to the territory. So he and his wife, his Bernice comes with him. I want to call his wife, but she's his sister. And history has labeled it as a very long, incestuous relationship. Okay? But she is like a co-ruler, and she comes with him, and she is his sister. By the way, Felix's third wife, who is Drusilla, that we heard about, is also Agrippa's sister. So they're all intermarried, and it makes that really kind of sound like a lot of American politics, doesn't it? Just letting you know that what's happening in our country is not new. Stuff has happened all over the place. So So Agrippa comes to visit Festus, and this is really a welcome to the territory. And while he's there, Festus goes, let me run this problem by you. I got this guy in prison who Felix left here, who never paid him a bribe, who wanted a bribe all those years, and he got left here. And he's been accused by the Jews of blah, 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 blah. So Festus actually presents the case to Agrippa, okay? And Paul's just sitting there in jail. He's not present at this time. And so he goes, I can't really find anything that he's done wrong, and now he's appealed to Caesar, and I got to send a letter, and what do I do now? So I don't know that he said it quite so blah like that what I just did, but presents it. And Agrippa's very curious, so he wants to hear the story. All right, so now I think we're on chapter 26, just so that we find our way through the story. And they convene court. Now, when they convene court, this now becomes a big ceremony with all kinds of pomp and spectacle and everything. And you can just see the band, the trumpeters playing, and they walk in their royal robes down the purple carpet or whatever it is, and all the high-notch important people of Caesarea are there. So there's a big crowd. So Paul now has an opportunity to present the gospel to the elite, okay? And in the area, he's probably very excited about this. He probably doesn't care about what happens to him, but he gets to present the gospel to the elite. And on the platform is his first king that he gets to present the gospel to. This is the first one with the title king and he was told he was going to get to do it to kings. So I can just see how excited he is to get in there, and he doesn't really care that it's a trial. He gets to present the gospel to these guys. So he goes in there to do that, and where am I at? I think we're on page 3. Okay, so he stands in front of, and I think he's going to talk to just Agrippa, like eyeball, like this is going, they're all listening, but I'm talking to you, type of thing. That's the impression I get. And Agrippa knows the story. Agrippa knows his family's story. He knows this. Agrippa knows Jesus' story, because Jesus' story is all wrapped up in this. So when Paul is talking to him and presenting this to him, Agrippa knows. Agrippa knows that it's his great-grandfather who massacred all the babies trying to kill the very one that Paul's talking about. I was just, I know a little bit about my family's story through the generations, and if you know a little bit about your family's story through the generations, can you imagine that being your story? And your great uncle. He's the one who beheaded John the Baptist. And your great-grandfather, he killed your great-grandmother, and your grandpa, and your uncle. And he's sitting there, and the Jesus story is weaving all through this. Agrippa, his dad, killed James, brother of John, put Peter in prison. And there's Paul standing there talking to you about this story. I just feel like this could be quite a moment of the Holy Spirit getting to Agrippa. And he's sitting there, and at one point, and I'm probably jumping around a little bit, at one point Paul looks at him and he goes, "Do you believe the prophets? I know that you do." So now, not only is the story going through his mind, the prophecies are going through his mind. Where was he going to be born? He was going to be born in Bethlehem. Was he going to suffer? Yes. Yes. Was your uncle one of the ones who voted with Pilate to put him on the cross? Yes. That's my family story. Oh. That would be hard. And then Paul is offering him the opportunity to break that negative, unbelieving response. You can change the story. This is a little off, but when my mom died, I got to talk at her service. And we had learned long ago that the evil King James was a direct ancestor, okay? And all the things that happened, and talk about I don't want that ancestry line, right? There's another person in the line that is a cousin, and that is, I just lost his name. Tell me the name of the great preacher in England in the 1800s that we listened to his... Spurgeon. Okay, Spurgeon is a cousin. So somewhere in this line of negative rejection, someone believed. And it changed the whole trajectory of my family's line. Because from about the time of Spurgeon on, and it's not like he talked to him, we don't have that kind of information, but it is a cousin. We have generation after generation after generation, and I know specifically of 7 past me where they talk about having Bibles, going to church, raising their kids like that, on and on and on. So, I mean, my point to the audience was, it doesn't matter what your background is. You can change it and start a new trajectory. And to me, I think it's hysterical that I have this evil ancestor, but I also think it's wonderful that I have Spurgeon, and that I have my mom and my grandma, my great-grandma, my great-great-grandma, and it's past that. And I have a great-great-grandfather who was a circuit preacher. And I think I've told you guys this before. And I have my great-grandmother's Bible with his notes. He's going through the Midwest in the 1800s where no one's going to school, teaching them Greek. Because she has the Greek words written in her Bible. Anyway, I'm just saying he has the opportunity to change the trajectory. And I think that's a cool lesson for us to learn. Really cool lesson for us to learn. Every single person has the opportunity to change the trajectory of their family, and I think that's really neat. So one of the things that, as he's going on and as he's presenting the gospel to him, and he's going to tell his story about Damascus all over again. This will be the third time third time Luke records Paul telling this story. And each time there's new information in it. And I think that's really cool. This time he's going to quote what Jesus told him that we don't know that he told him in Acts 9, and we don't know that he told him in Acts 22, but now we're going to hear what Jesus said. He's going to say, you are going to tell them, let me see here, you will open their eyes that they may turn from darkness to light. That's like all of a sudden getting objective reality. And then he's going to say, and from the dominion of Satan to God. That's like offering you freedom. That they may receive forgiveness of their sins. That is the gospel. And you need some hope? How about an inheritance of faith? Talk about a legacy to pass on. That's what I'm hoping I can pass on to my grandchildren, and if I live long enough, my great-grandchildren. I just think that's really neat. And if you have family that's not responding, You can keep praying. That is the most powerful thing there is. So I don't want to be discouraging to anyone who doesn't have family that's not responding. We just found out from Eva last week that family responds. And that was so excited. She just found out that 2 of her children believed in Christ. Adult children that she had told about forever and ever and ever and ever. And they did. So don't ever give up. And you can still be that change of trajectory there on your family. So he's looking out there, and Festus says, oh, you got to be insane. Because he's going to reach the resurrection of the dead. Because that is the main issue. He is going to raise them from the dead. He's going to pay for the sins, but if he stayed dead, dead still won. Right? Death still won. If Jesus didn't rise, death still won. And if death still wins, then Satan still wins. Because that was the punishment. Death, okay? So Paul is going to constantly make this an issue. He has to raise from the dead, because when that happens, Satan is completely, between the sins forgiven and the raised from the dead, he has lost the game entirely. The Greek people listening to this, for the most part, can't tolerate resurrection from the dead because it is infused in their thinking from the time they were barely walking that, and this is actually next week's lesson, sorry, that the body, the physical, is evil, the spiritual is good. This is the basic components of Greek philosophy, which means, and you could take this all different directions. Some guys take this and go, well, if the spiritual is what's good and the body doesn't matter, you can just go do anything you want so you can have the most lascivious life there is and still be spiritual and good. Because the body doesn't matter. All right? You can take it the other direction, and half the philosophers take it the other direction, and they go, well, because the physical is evil, you have to be so completely like aesthetic. You can't do anything. You can't, it's so much so that's this huge extreme. But one thing they both agreed upon is that the physical could not be raised from the dead and be good. Because it's still physical. And that is ingrained from, like when Paul is teaching this, it's like hearing something that is beyond, outside of our realm of good and bad. And it's so very, very hard. So when he talks about the resurrection of the dead, which is the big fight between Pharisees and Sadducees, right? Okay, when he takes it to the Greeks, that's why they laughed at him in Athens, because he mentioned the resurrection of the dead. So as soon as he says that, Festus goes, oh, you are insane. We need to, tie you up and put you in a white room with padded walls because you've gone crazy. And he goes, Agrippa knows what I'm talking about. And Agrippa goes, give me a minute. So, are you trying to make me become a Christian? And some people, I read several people's comments on that. Some people think he said that very honestly, like, I'm on the edge. Some people think he said that very sarcastically. I don't know. I hope it was more honestly, and that he's on the edge, and he walked out of there and thought about it. Although the rest of the story of his life doesn't give that impression. Just saying that. So, they continue with this. Paul gets to present all these people. I have no idea how everybody respond. How did the guard respond? How did all the attendants respond? In heaven, wouldn't it be neat if we find out that a bunch of them responded and listened and heard? Don't know, but he got to say it. And the key issue is with all of us. How people respond is not our job. Our job is to say it, and to say it clearly, and to say it bravely, and like Paul did. And what they did to him because of it, he didn't care. He wanted to say it. I would hope I would have that courage. If I was standing in front of a bunch of people with rocks, or even if they were just had, tomatoes? And they, you know how they storm houses at Halloween and they do all this, okay. And they were throwing tomatoes at me. Would I still have the courage to say it regardless of the response? I would so hope so. But I haven't been put in a tomato attack situation yet. And so I've had people reject the gospel when I present it to them, but not with tomatoes, and not with rocks, and not with chains, and not with threats of death. So that is an important issue there. I got to get a little bit further before I break, otherwise we won't finish this, just because I talk on too much. They go out and they call the end of the trial. They send Paul out, and then the jury sits there and they decide what they're going to do with Paul. And the jury is Festus and Agrippa and Bernice, right? The same people as the judge. And they come up with the conclusion that he's innocent and that he could have been set free had he not appealed to Caesar. But he already appealed to Caesar, so he has to go to Caesar. It does not say I don't know what the accusation is, the legal document that they send with him on this trip to Caesar. I never found the legal document. I don't know what that is. What would you say? You got to send him to Nero. Nero at the moment is still a fairly decent emperor. Okay, you got to know that at this time in the story. He hasn't done any major, big, bad things yet. He will. So they find him not guilty, but they have to send him, so they're going to put him on a ship, and he's going to have a guard who's a centurion, which is a high-ranking guard, and they are going to head out towards Rome. So that's a good breaking spot. So Festus is going to hand Paul to the centurion. The centurion's name is Julius, and he is going to take Paul to Rome. You got to know that Paul is not the only prisoner going to Rome on this trip. So Julius has, and I don't know how many, he's got a group of prisoners that he has to deliver to Rome. He also has a battalion of, a centurion usually has 100 people. That's why he's called a centurion. He usually has 100 soldiers under him, but I don't know that he has that many at this time, but he's got a bunch of soldiers and a bunch of prisoners that he has to deliver to Rome. So when you think about this, they're not getting on a fishing boat. You know, they're getting on a big boat. And they have to, not only that, is Luke and Aristarchus are joining them, and they're mentioned in this. There may be that Timothy is there, and the only reason I say that is because Timothy was with Paul on the trip to Jerusalem, and he will be with Paul in Rome when they land. Now maybe he took, during those 2 years and all that, he left and joined them later. It doesn't actually say that he's on the trip, but he might be on the trip too. I don't know for sure. That's another one of those questions. I just got to find out all these details. And It's going to be quite a moment in eternity when I get the rest of the details, the rest of the story. So I have a long list of questions, yes. And anyway, they are going to get on a ship and they're going to head out. And this is a big enough ship that it is a cargo type ship, but it is not an Alexandrian ship. Now, I explained to you what an Alexandrian ship is, but we'll get there. So first thing they do is they take off and they come up and they land in Sidon. And the centurion, maybe he was in the judgment hall when Paul was talking to Agrippa, because he has a lot of respect for Paul. And he gives Paul a lot of free leeway. Now, he probably has to have him chained, regardless, but he treats him with a lot of respect. And while he's in Sidon, Paul is allowed to go visit his friends in Sidon, and I think he stays there for a couple days or so. You'll have to, I'm confused of when he stays a week and when he stays a couple days. But now here's my question. He had friends in Tyre. You remember this? On the way in, he stopped in on Tyre. Okay. And he had friends in Sidon. No other place is it mentioned that there are any Christians in Tyre or Sidon. Do you know what Tyre or Sidon is the country from? It's Phoenicia. This is Jezebel's country. She was from Tyre and Sidon. She is from Phoenicia, that area, and I thought, doesn't God have this wonderful sense of humor? He has brought Christianity to Jezebel. I bet you Elijah was just up there going, yes! As he's looking down at the story after they did the big old thing on Carmel and Jezebel's chasing him to kill him, and now Christianity is in her towns. I just thought he is just like celebrating big time. And so, but I thought that was really interesting that that is their territory, and he is visiting in Tyre, this time in Sidon, last time in Tyre, and that the centurion gives him the freedom to go visit. So you must think that Paul's not going to escape. I mean, how he's taken a risk, put it that way, that Paul could escape, right? And he's not going to do that. Okay, so they get on another ship and they are going to sail. Now, the smartest way to get from Caesarea to Rome is the way they came. From here to here. See how they just passed by on the end of the third trip when they're on their way to Jerusalem? They went like that, straight across. That would be like, take the I-5 down to LA this way. Don't take Highway 1 if you're in a hurry, right? Okay. So that is, but they're not doing that. They're going to go this long, slow route up here to Myra. And the reason is the time of year. It is probably October. And, oh, by the way, is today the 7th?
Yes.
2 years ago today, I was out of Israel by 2 days. And so was Martha. We were out of Israel by 2 days. I didn't find out about the problem really quickly because we were on a cruise ship that didn't have Wi-Fi unless you paid extra. And I wasn't going to pay extra to get Wi-Fi on the cruise ship because I really didn't want to connect with everybody. I wanted to enjoy the trip, right? So found out on the TV that night. But just a little side note, you probably all know this already, but my phone, since it was on airplane mode, was registering me for both of these days from the 5th to the 7th as being in Tel Aviv. And my daughters, who are my mommies, are watching very carefully my entire trip to see where I am and that I'm where I'm supposed to be and that nothing is, and here I am in Tel Aviv where threats are going off, and I think there was a bomb that went off in Tel Aviv during that time. And that's where my phone is showing me, well, I'm safe, having a wonderful time on a cruise through the Aegean, right here, because I've already landed in Athens. And, but afterwards, all I could think of is how much God put me in a safe place. He put us in a safe place in a treacherous time. And he kept us in a safe place. Eventually, my daughter flipped for the very expensive phone call to the cruise ship to make sure I was alive and not in some prison somewhere. And she was very relieved. But so that was 2 years ago today. And I still really feel and pray for those Jewish people. And it's not so much for everybody's freedom and for the lack of war. What it is for them to receive this gospel and them to understand what Jesus had just done for me, he can do for them too. And so they are in my prayers a lot, but more so than the safety of each different group as the actual presentation, the listening to the gospel for them. Anyway, since I was just, leaving, Caesarea is really close to Tel Aviv, so leaving Tel Aviv and going there. So, anyway, so they get on and it was at this time of year when they did this trip. So they are doing this trip during, just after the Day of Atonement, because Paul is going to mention later on that the fast is over. There's only one fast day in the Jewish calendar that's mandated. Okay? I mean, there's lots of days they fast, but there's only one they have to, and that's the Day of Atonement. And he's going to say that the Day of Atonement was just over. The Day of Atonement is like, I don't know the date, but it's right about a day or two before the Feast of the Tabernacles. When we were there was the Feast of the Tabernacles. It was really neat. There was tents all over. Everybody's balcony had a tent on it, and it was just really swarms of people. You had to fight through you had to crawl through the crowd to get up to the Wailing Wall to touch it and pray for people. So it was just a really neat thing. I'm sure you have all those good memories. So it tells us the time of year. And you do not sail across the Med in October. Not if you want to live. You just don't do that. So they have to go up and around this way. They have to take the long route. So they're going to go up. They're going to follow the coastline. And Luke is very specific in explaining all these places like this, and it makes total sense when you know the time of year and what the weather is like on the Med. And so they're going to come up and they're going to land in Myra, this town right here. And right at this point, they're going to get an Alexandrian ship. An Alexandrian ship, one guy mentioned that it is a huge cargo ship that probably holds, I think I've got it on here, 200 or 300 passengers plus all the cargo. So this is one, you got to think back 2,000 years when they don't have engines yet, And they've got this big ship. Somebody mentioned that there has not been a ship of that size as you go through history until you get to the beginning of the 19th century. Okay, so this is one big ship, and it's got probably 3 levels of rowers so that they row deep in the water, 3 levels going out, lots of people rowing, and then they've got all the sails, and they've got room for tons of cargo. This is a big, the person who sends this ship, this is a big investment. Okay, so not only is the ship itself a big investment, the cargo on the ship is a big investment, and it's going from Alexandria to Rome. And it happens to be stopping right here on the way, and that's when Paul and the group get on board. So you got to realize that you got 70 to 80 soldiers, you got a group of prisoners, you got a centurion, you got all the other passengers, you got Luke, and you got Aristarchus, and maybe some others in that group. And that's how many people get on the ship at Myra. And there were several others, there was lots on there already. Okay, so they take off, and about right here, Paul looks at the centurion and he says, "This is not a good idea. You should not make this trip." All right, the centurion really respects Paul. But on the other hand, here's the captain of the ship. And the captain of the ship says, "Yeah, we can get around. Here's his plan. What he wants to do is he just wants to get from here, around here, follow the coast, get down here to Crete, go around the backside, and spend the winter right there." Okay? That's where he wants to spend the winter. All right, so he thinks he's a good captain of the ship. He would not be the captain of this ship if he was not well trained and do a good job, right? So he's going to do that, and the centurion. I mean, think about it. Who would you listen to? This prisoner who doesn't know how to sail, or the captain of the ship? So I can't blame the centurion for making the decision, because this just seems logical. So they go on, and as they get to here, they get all the way through here, as they get into here, the storm starts getting really big. And when the Bible describes this big storm, it's going to call it a big storm, all right? I look out my window, and it's pouring down, and the leaves are going, and the trees are, I think that's a big storm. That is nothing. This storm is on the level of a hurricane. Would you like to be on the ship, traveling through? And especially if you're not in the eye? What are the odds of any ship? What are the odds of a ship we have now? What are the odds of one of our military ships surviving sailing through the hurricane? Would it make it? I don't know. It wouldn't go there, but if it got caught in one, would the ship even survive it, you know? So it gets really bad. They finally get around here to, what's the name of that place? I know you guys know. Because I know you know this story so well. Fair Havens, yes. And it's a very violent wind, and the ship is out of control. They finally pull the sails down, and they just let the wind take it wherever. Then it says that they put these anchors under the ship. That means, and I have no idea how they pulled this off because it's not a small ship. That means they took the ropes, all the ropes that are all over the place, and actually went under the ship and tied it up. So did one of the sailors actually dive under? I have no idea how they did it, but it says they tied up under the ship. And then they made sea anchors. And sea anchors are, my thought was, you know, this is a sea anchor, right? Right? You throw it in the water, and it's that big metal thing. That's not what that is. This is, they took sails, and they tied up the things like giant balloon type things, and they put it under the ship to catch the water, to slow the thing, like a giant parachute, okay, to catch it. So these guys, I mean, I wouldn't have thought of that. These guys know how to deal with a storm. So this is not inexperienced, and it's beyond them. It's going beyond them. And they get to Fair Havens, and they can't winter there because there's no place. So he goes, we're going to take the last 40 miles. We're going to just follow the coast We're going to land there, and we're going to winter there. That's the plan. In that little 40 miles it gets completely out of control to the point where they give up entirely. They don't see daylight for 2 weeks. Can you imagine how the ship is rocking? And there's a lot of people, and they're starting to throw everything overboard, and they're starting to swell up into, now this particular map has the line going from here to here. I don't think it was straight. All right? They're starting to well up all over, and down in here is called the graveyard of the Med, and it's mentioned in there by a different name, but it's these, well, you'll see it in here. There's that place, okay? If they get caught in there, there's high shoals and low shoals, and you cannot navigate through it, and almost every ship that gets caught in there in a storm crashes and lands on the bottom. So they are terrified of this, and they don't know where they're at. They have no idea where they're at. There's no daylight. There's no stars. There's no navigation. They don't have GPS, or UPS. Okay, so they don't know where they're at. They've lost their sense of direction, and the storm is terrible. And they go for like 2 weeks without eating. Even in a bad storm, I might grab a bite, a piece of bread here. That's how bad it is. They are terrified, and they throw all the goods overboard. They start throwing the tackle overboard. That's all the supplies that runs the ship. It's all the gears, all the tools, all the ropes, all the things that, how are they going to run the ship afterwards? They're not trying to steer or do anything anymore. They're just trying to not die. And if it is determined that an act of nature caused the disaster of the loss of all the cargo, then the person who owned the ship and sent the goods, they take the loss legally. Okay? But if it's considered that it was a bad decision on the part of the captain of the ship or the crew, then the captain of the ship and the crew take responsibility for the loss. So you think maybe the captain of the crew, and what is the centurion thinking at this point? If any of his guys, any of his prisoners even begin to escape, they have to kill them all. They cannot let them escape. They have to kill them all. It's kind of like the soldier, the guard who was in Philippi with Peter and Paul and Silas, and he sees that they're escaping. If he can't stop that and kill them or stop it, he has to kill himself. So the soldiers know they have to kill all the... So this is a real big thing. And Paul, in the midst of this, an angel comes and talks to Paul. And I think this is so cool. There was a time in Corinth when everything was against Paul. And Jesus came to Paul and said, "Don't be afraid. I have a lot of people in this city. You're going to be just fine." Okay? He's in Jerusalem. And he's about ready to be killed. They're all over him, right? And Jesus comes and says, "Have a lot of courage. It's okay. You're going to live through this. You're going to go to Rome." So here they are. Their lives are threatened, seriously threatened, in a storm bigger than I can imagine, with hunger and no sleep, and it's just unreal. And an angel comes and says, "Don't be afraid. You guys are all going to live through this." And I thought, isn't that cool? In the worst times of your life, God is going to come and encourage you. I haven't ever heard an angel come and say, Debbie, you're going to be okay. But I have read it all over. It is estimated that there are, and I haven't checked this out personally, but I've heard it several times, that there are 366 promises to not be afraid in the Bible. One for every day of the year. So, has God done the same for us? Yes, he has. All these times. Be of good courage. Don't be afraid. And I think Paul didn't have the New Testament written yet. He's writing it, a lot of it. And Jesus has the angel come and tell him that. So, Paul stands up. You could see him standing. He just doesn't stand up and they all look at it. Are you kidding me? They are rocking. They are barely hanging on. Half of them are throwing up from seasickness. It's horrible. They can't stand up. Nobody's slept. Everybody's hungry. You've got passengers on there. You've got crew doesn't know what to do. You've got soldiers. Are the soldiers like getting ready to stab everybody? What are they doing with their Machiras, right? Okay? And Paul goes, don't be afraid, we're going to make it through this. An angel of the God who I believe in came to me last night to tell me we are going to make it through this. And he says, we need to eat. We need to eat. So I'm on page 5, thank you. So we need to eat, and I'm probably skipping over lots of details. And so they have thrown everything out. They are, at this point, have gotten all the way close to Malta. But it wasn't just like this. This is a mess. They have no, and when they get close, they do throw over the rest of the food because they've got to try to. The ship is going to sink. They got to try to lighten it as much as possible before they have to throw over the people, And so they come in and they get this weird idea. And one of the mates throws over a depth thing and measures it, and then a few hours later he throws it over again, and it's less, which means they are coming up to land. And when it says they came up to a place that they did not recognize. These are sailors and the captain of the ship who sail the Med for their profession. I'm guessing they know what everything looks like. And they come to a place they do not recognize. And it happens to be on the other side of that little island of Malta, which is actually 3 little islands kind of all piled right there. And there's this one spot where between the little islands, it looks like 2 seas come together. And you could go look at that today if you want to go online and look at that. And there's a cove area that has a beach. And it has the reefs there, so you can get caught on the reef. So if a big ship comes through, it will get caught on the reef. And that's what happens. And they land there, and the ship just falls apart. And that's when the soldiers are going to kill all the prisoners. And the centurion, Paul has already told the centurion, we're going to make it. We're going to be fine. And in respect for Paul's opinion this time, the centurion orders his men to not kill the prisoners, so that Paul is not going to be killed. Isn't that cool? So the whole thing falls apart, and there's more parts of the story where they wanted to put down a life raft, and they had to cut that off, and there's lots of different things going on. But anyway, they all come in and they land on the beach. And they don't know where they're at. And Luke calls the people, the natives, barbaroi, which means we would call them barbarians. Is that? And in that time, that meant 2 things. They didn't speak Latin, They didn't speak Greek. And yet, Paul knows how to communicate with them. So they did speak something that was similar to Phoenician, which is somewhat similar to Hebrew. So Paul is able to communicate with the natives. Isn't that interesting how God always plans those things out? Or Paul has his fifth language, and I am impressed beyond imagination. 5 languages, and he can speak to these natives, and so they build, and it's obviously very cold and stormy still. They welcome them in, they build a fire, and Paul is, you would think he would sit down and go, but he doesn't. He gets up and starts gathering wood for the fire, and as he does, a poisonous snake comes out and bites him on the hand. All right. Evidently, they know a lot about these snakes, and to get bitten on the hand by whatever snake that meant you foamed at the mouth, went into convulsions, fell over, and died within 30 minutes. Okay? I don't know that you foamed, but something like all that had happened. Okay? And so the natives have heard enough information now, enough conversation that he was a prisoner. They understand that. Evidently, the sea didn't get him. The sea didn't do justice to kill this murderer, but the snake will. Okay? And then he shakes it off, lands in the fire, and he just goes about his business. And nothing happens. And immediately they switch over, he's got to be a god then. That's what they did in Lystra, way back in the first missionary journey, right before he got stoned. Do you remember that? They thought that Paul and Barnabas were the gods. And so he says no, and he uses this opportunity. I'm not exactly sure because it's not described, but he uses this opportunity to do what Paul does. And what is that Paul does? He presents the gospel to the people. Any opportunity, a snake bite. Now for me, I can deal with spiders. I can deal with tarantulas. I can deal with mice. I can deal with all kinds of things, but snakes are not my thing. I will call someone else to deal with the snake. But so Paul is like, okay, no big deal. And he uses this to present the gospel. Well, the governor of the island is a man named, okay, you guys have to tell me. Publius, yes. And he is sort of the governor of the island, and his father is really, really sick. And so Paul goes, okay, take me to your father. And Paul heals his father. And everybody is in awe, all right? And so they start bringing all their sick people on the whole island. Now, what if the island is just the size of Amador County? How many sick people? Everybody who's sick, come to church on Sunday, we're going to heal y'all, And I know that there's churches that do that, but that's kind of what was going on. And Paul really does heal them all. And so they spend the winter there, and there is a cove there to this day called St. Paul's Cove. And they remember him. He's the patron saint of Malta. There's a grotto, which is like a cave area, a very nice, big, cleaned-out cave area. That's called St. Paul's Grotto, and that's where they think he lived for the 3 months of the winter that he was at. To this, the church tradition says that Paul started a church on Malta during those 3 months, and that Publius became the pastor of that church, and eventually became the first pastor, the first bishop of Athens, which, see? Over here, okay? And so that is in church tradition. Today, on this tiny little place called Malta, there's 360 churches. And they have this little saying that you could go to church every day of the year. And that is 2,000 years later. Talk about impact. Using a snake to present the gospel. I just was very impressed. So they leave there come early spring. We are now in the year 60. And as just to give you some time frame, there's 30 when Jesus was crucified. Okay, there's 40 when the disciples are kind of getting on it, you know, and everything's happening. There's 50 when there was the Jerusalem Council, is about this time. 60 is now. 70, Jerusalem will be destroyed. So we're 10 years out from Jerusalem being destroyed. Just to kind of give you, between here and there, Paul's going to die and Peter's going to die, and a lot of the other ones are going to die. Okay? John's going to live past. Just to kind of like get your brain in that. So they get on another, they go to a couple stops, they have to get on another Alexandrian ship, and they head up towards Rome. They're going to land in this place called Puteoli. Is that how you say that? I don't know. They're going to kind of not be far from what's the name of the city that was destroyed by Pompeii. They're not far from Pompeii. Okay. They've been to Pompeii. They're not far from there. As a matter of fact, trying to think. Festus's wife, Felix's wife, and their kids, according to the story, Felix's wife and their kids lived in Pompeii and died during Vesuvius. Felix's first wife was great-granddaughter of Anthony and Cleopatra. Just stuff going on in the background. My goodness. Okay, so Pompeii is not that far away, but he is going to land here, and people are going to come and meet him. Christians are going to come and meet him. Paul has never been to Rome. He's never been to Italy. To our knowledge, nobody's been to Italy, except for maybe Priscilla and Aquila. They've been to Italy. But there were people from Rome who were at Pentecost. Isn't that cool? But not only that is that earlier, Claudius had thrown all the Jews and Christians out of Rome. This is only about, this is 60, that was about 54. So it's only been about 6 years since he's died, which means people could go back. So 6 years is not a long time to reestablish a whole entire Jewish and Christian community. And yet it has been reestablished already, and these Christians meet Paul on the road. So, and they travel with him up. This is the Via, what is it, Appia? Mm-hmm. That's the main road to Rome. And he walks that, and you can still walk that road. It's pretty cool. And as he walks to Rome, this is someone else's idea, this isn't mine, but I thought it was really cool that he could do the Roman road. You guys know what the Roman road is? Isn't that neat? So he's already written Romans. They've already received it. The Roman road is a little thing you use to present the gospel to people. And it's walking through the book of Romans with certain great verses. Like one of the first verses would be Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And I'm wondering if he's repeating it in his mind as he goes. And the next verse would be The wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life. I have them out of order, just letting you know on my brains. And then there's 5:8 that says, but while God demonstrates his love to us, but while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And then you go on to a little bit further. There's all kinds of good verses in chapter 4. How blessed is he whose sin is forgiven and whose transgression is covered. And that's a little bit off of the actual quote, but it's something like that. And then he goes through and you get to Romans 8:1, and it's, therefore there is now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. So that used to be a gospel tract, and it was written as the Romans Road for salvation. And I thought that was interesting to do that. I checked out, and AI says, I go, okay, who wrote the Romans Road, meaning the tract? I'm trying to write this. And AI says, oh, Paul wrote the Romans Road. I thought it was pretty funny. I was laughing. Good old AI. Okay. All right. So he gets there. Rome is a huge city. And it is probably, they estimate, had 1 million people at that time. They don't think another city has 1 million people until you get to London in the 1800s. So that's how big that city is. That city has so much. They have so many palaces. They have the Colosseum. They have all these arches. They have the Hippodrome where they race the horses. It's a huge, built up, it's a New York City looking city back then. Some of it's very high, very many stories high. And one of the places that they had a lot of apartments. And these apartments were good 4 and 5 stories high, and they had the businesses in the bottom, in the ground floor, and the people lived in the apartments above them. And this was sort of the poor end of the city. And they estimate that Paul got to stay in one of those, because he gets there, he's under house arrest. And this is somewhat close to the Praetorian, the Praetorian, where the soldiers are. So they think that he stayed in one of those apartments there, and we'll hear more about those in a couple weeks. But so he lived there for 2 years, and he is under house arrest, waiting for his opportunity to go in front of Nero. And he has to pay for it himself. Yeah. Now, how many criminals have to pay for their lodgings? He has to pay for it himself. And think about it. What's he going to do? Start a tent-making business in his cell? He has to pay for it himself. He's got with him, we're going to find out, he's got about 10 people with him. Timothy, and he's got Aristarchus, and he's going to have Tychicus, and he's going to have several people with him. So supporting 10 people for 2 years is not without a job. Well, there's going to be lots of provision for that, so that's pretty neat. So he's going to stay there. He can't, Paul's policy is always go to a new place, go to the synagogue, talk to the Jews first, and then when they reject you, because they always do, he's going to go out to the Gentiles. Well, he can't leave. And he's chained to a soldier at all times. I guess it's better than the maritime prison. I'm just telling you. The maritime prison is a building that has a big pit in the middle, and it's probably a good 15 feet, 20 feet high, too high to climb up the walls, and they just drop you through the hole. And then they watch from up here and they drop you through the hole. So that would be the maritime prison. So he's not there. He's in this place, and he is going to be there, and he gets to have as many visitors as he wants. So you can tell that Julius, the centurion, put in a good word for Paul to the new Praetorian Guard. By the time he finishes this 2 years, You can tell they're going to rotate soldiers. Probably they get 10-hour, 12-hour shifts, whatever, being tied up to Paul. And Paul never stops preaching the gospel. So one after another. By the time we get to the end of the 2 years, he's going to say the entire Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard is about 10,000.
Oh my goodness.
So you would think, if you were looking at this from the human point of view, you would go, if your worldview was human viewpoint, you would go, Paul, you just got shut down. You are in prison. Are you kidding? He is not shut down at all. Not only that, he gets to present all of it to the Praetorian Guard. He also gets to present it to the royal family. So the royal family is going to hear. And then the Jewish population of Rome comes at his invitation to his house and says, let's have synagogue service here. My mind is kind of blown how God gets people to respond, because really, who would do that, right? But they all go, we got to hear. We've heard bad things about the way, and yet you're telling us, and so we want to know. And so he gets not a very good response, but he gets to tell them. And then the Gentiles start coming in, and he gets to tell lots of them. And there's some very interesting Gentiles that come in and meet with him, which I'm going to tell you about next week. But and then at the end of the 2 years, where does he go? Does he get acquitted? Does he get tried? Does the whole thing get dropped? Do the Jews from Jerusalem eventually show up? Because in order to have this trial, they have to have that prosecution. So those Jews have to make the trip from Jerusalem to Rome just to try Paul. And 2 years go by. So now he's been waiting for 4 years now, because he was in 2 in Caesarea and 2 in here. And that's where I'll leave you. And he is stuck in prison.
Wow.
Dear Father in heaven, thank you for this exciting story. Thank you that you have given each of us an exciting story. Help us to have the courage of Paul. Help us to be able to teach us how to present the gospel well, like Paul does. Thank you for all the details. Thank you for all the times you've protected him. Thank you for all the times you've protected us. Thank you for all the promises you gave to him. Thank you for all the promises you've given to us, and how he looks at his life and to discover with joy. You would not think that, considering his life. And yet he looks at his life with joy every day. Help us to look at our lives with joy, no matter what's going on. And please bless these words into our souls. In Jesus' name.